is a convenient alternative for Europe to face the very sad reality that it is a shrinking, decreasingly important part of a large world economy, dominated on the one hand by the rising power of China and the BRICS, who now account for 35% of global output, relative to the United States and the G7, which are shrinking and now account for maybe 27, 28% of the world's output. And that's only getting worse. It's gotten worse, that gap, every year since 2020, when the two crossed, when the total GDP of the G7 was roughly equal to the total GDP of the BRICS at that time. And it's gotten worse and worse. Look, the economic conditions of Europe are very serious.
Europe's crisis isn't just political, it's structural. BRICS overtaking the G7 marked the moment the global center of gravity shifted away from the West. Since then, Europe has been shrinking in economic relevance year after year, and instead of confronting this decline, its leaders fixate on Russia as a convenient distraction. It's easier to blame an external enemy than admit the model itself is failing. But no amount of rhetoric will reverse deindustrialization or demographic collapse. Europe's real challenge is adapting to a world where it no longer writes the rules.
The United States sees the dead end that the Ukraine, for them, represents. They have a different scapegoat. The scapegoat in the United States is immigration. By the way, as it is in many European countries also. But here it's the number one. And maybe the number two is China. But Russia isn't playing that role. And the United States is nowhere near as far down the decline ladder as Europe already is. Europe has been declining for a long time. The last real empire the Europeans had was the British, and that died after World War I and was completely dismembered after World War II, as history teaches us. So the Europeans are further down the road. They're becoming more and more desperate.
Europe's decline didn't begin yesterday. It has been unfolding for a century. The end of the British Empire marked the moment Europe stopped shaping the world and started adjusting to it. Now that economic weakness is exposed, desperation is replacing strategy. Meanwhile, the US hides its own failures behind new scapegoats, immigration and China, while quietly recognizing Ukraine as a dead end. But unlike Europe, America hasn't yet hit the steep part of the decline curve. Europe, however, is already sliding. And it knows it. That desperation is driving decisions that look less like policy and more like panic.
Every major high-tech breakthrough is either in Silicon Valley, US, or in China. We all know it. We all see it. That's where the breakthroughs are coming. That's where the investment is robust. Come on. You have to be blind not to see this, or blinded by a need not to see. And for me, these wild statements, we're going to win in Ukraine, the Russians have let us know that they were very upset as NATO moved east. They had been given those promises, not that that's all that important, that it wouldn't happen. Okay, it happened. Shouldn't have been much surprised by it. And it kept happening. But taking Poland back, taking East Germany back, those were countries that really were, but Ukraine was integrated into Russia in a way that other parts of Eastern Europe were not.
Europe's tech stagnation is obvious when the real breakthroughs now come from the US and China. Ignoring this reality has pushed Europe toward political fantasies instead of innovation. So when leaders claim they'll win in Ukraine, it feels detached from the facts. Russia warned repeatedly about NATO moving east, But those warnings were brushed aside. Poland and East Germany were one thing, Ukraine was something far deeper for Moscow. It was historically and culturally tied to Russia in ways Europe never understood. And that misunderstanding is now driving a crisis no one knows how to stop.
Europe is a flailing decline, and they want to take the world down with them. That's why they can talk in the way you just showed us. Provoke, provoke. Their whole game is what's causing all the tension. They want to pull the United States in to what they are trying to do. And that is turn the decline of Europe around, which is why you will hear when they have a mistaken moment, they're not listening, the microphone is still on. They want to carve Russia up into little small countries so they could eventually what? Counter what's happening in the world. Think about their fantasy. People's utopian dreams tell you much about them. If they could absorb Russia and then separate it from China, well, then you would have a US on one end, a reduced China minus Russia on the other end, and an enlarged Europe now absorbing Russia. That would bring them a nuclear weapon.
Europe's decline has created a kind of desperation that pushes its leaders toward reckless provocation. Instead of fixing their problems, they try to drag the United States into their failing project. That's why the rhetoric sounds so extreme. It's driven by fear, not strategy. And when their microphones slip, you hear the real dream, carving Russia into pieces. It's a fantasy born from empire nostalgia, not modern geopolitics. They imagine weakening Russia to isolate China and reclaim global relevance. But fantasies don't rewrite geography, and they won't reverse Europe's decline.
These movements, Europe is too divided, Europe is too far down the ladder to do much about it. So it becomes hysterical. And what you're seeing is the hysterical effort. Mr. Trump tries in his clumsy way to disengage from all of this. Here, Europe, you do it. And the Europeans want to control what happens, but know they don't have the power. They really do know they don't have the power. So either they get the United States in or they lose. So that's what this is about. They could care less about the Ukraine. That's just the game. The issue is hold on to the United States because you are nothing at all without them. And that nothing at all is staring at you in a way that no American administration before Trump was willing to say out loud. Privately here in the United States,
Europe knows it's too divided and too weakened to shape events on its own. That's why its behavior looks more hysterical than strategic. Trump's attempt to step back exposed a truth Europeans already knew. They lack real power. Without the United States, their entire geopolitical position collapses. So Ukraine becomes a tool, not a cause, to keep America locked in. The fear isn't about losing territory, it's about losing relevance. And for the first time, a US president said aloud what Europe only whispered in private.
At the end of World War II, you needed allies against communism and the Soviet Union. That's what this was about. And you got that. And you made a deal with Europe. We will give you defense protection, and we will give you a privileged relationship with us. But in exchange, you must be loyal allies politically, and you must turn over your empire to us. And that's what was done. The British, French, all those empires closed down after World War II, and the United States moved in and replaced them. It's very important, people. And what was Europe left? No empire. That was half the wealth flowing into Europe was coming from the empire. That was taken away from them. and they were reduced to being the ally of the United States, and they were given all kinds of benefits and privileges about that. It was a good deal for them. I'm not saying they didn't get from it. They did. They got the Marshall Plan. They were helped to rebuild after World War II.
After World War II, Europe entered a bargain it never fully recovered from. The US offered protection and partnership, but the price was Europe surrendering its old empires. Those empires had supplied half the wealth that kept Europe powerful. When they disappeared, so did Europe's ability to act independently on the world stage. America stepped in to fill the vacuum, and Europe became a junior partner. The Marshall Plan helped rebuild their cities, but it also cemented their dependence, and that dependence still shapes Europe's behavior today, fearful, reactive, and unable to stand alone.
Mr. Trump comes up with his 28-point plan. And here in the United States, where we have a large part of our mentality also still in the Cold War, that's a slightly different, similar, but different. They're attached not to the long road of a declining Europe and civilization. No, they are a political class who is instinctually trained for 70 years in anything coming from the Soviet Union or Russia is bad, 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 bad. That's how they squashed the left. They're very upset now that the left is coming back inside the United States. That's the importance of the election of Zoran Mamdani in New York City, of Bernie Sanders, of Ocasio-Cortez, the whole, and it's getting bigger literally every day in the United States. I'm sitting here, I can tell you, it's all around me. Never before in my lifetime have I seen this.
America's political class is still wired for the Cold War, trained to treat anything tied to Russia as inherently dangerous. This mindset wasn't just foreign policy, it was a tool to suppress the left for generations. But now the left is resurging in ways the establishment never expected. Figures like Zoran Mamdani, Bernie Sanders, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez signal a shift that Washington isn't prepared for. For decades, U.S. leaders only knew how to manage Republicans and Democrats. Now a new political force is emerging outside that old framework, and it's disrupting the instincts that once kept Cold War thinking firmly in place.
As more like the United States. But we don't have thinking people by and large. And so you won't find it among that. You will find it among the think tank, the people whose job it is to try to think this through. They are seeing many of these things, but they don't have power yet. A few, but mostly they don't. So what you have is the leftovers. And the leftover Cold Warriors, sometimes called neocons, same thing, is they sabotage. That's all they can do. Mr. Trump is doing what the mainstream wants to do, and then there's the saboteurs. And one of them leaked the conversation between Witkoff and Lavrov or whoever the
Kirill Dmitriev.
Yeah, so it really it doesn't matter. One way or another, these things are fought out. Now they will try to find who did that.
Europe mirrors the US in one troubling way. The real thinkers rarely hold real power. The people who understand the shifting world order sit in think tanks, not in government. So leadership is left in the hands of Cold War leftovers, neocons who only know how to sabotage, not build. Their instinct is always the same. Disrupt, leak, provoke, repeat. Trump in many ways is simply acting out what the mainstream wants, even if clumsily, and the sabotage that follows is just the old guard trying to protect its fading influence. These internal battles aren't about strategy, they're about a dying mindset fighting to stay alive.
Trump makes a deadline. I believe his deadline for the 28-point plan was today, the 27th. That'll come and go like so many others, because this is an ongoing process. And moreover, all of the people participating understand the element of time. Let me stop. I know I'm talking too much, but let me stop with the notion of time, because it'll help people trying to understand this. Time is not the same for all the players here. This is not a game in which there's one unit of time that everybody must observe. So let's start with the Chinese. For them, everything now is relaxed. Why? Because time is on their side. For 30 years, every year, China is a bigger, richer, more powerful player in the world economy. Every year. And every year, Europe goes down relative to China, and the United States falls behind relative to China. When you hear an American talk about China's aggressiveness, that's his need to talk about it that way, but it has nothing to do with it. The Chinese don't need to be aggressive. The US has 700 bases around the world. That's how it replaced all those empires after World War
Trump's
II
deadlines
by
come and
making
go because
itself
none of the
the
major players
universal
are operating on the
unipower.
same clock. Time moves differently for each of them, and understanding that is key to understanding this crisis. China feels no urgency. Every year it grows stronger, while Europe and the US slip relatively backward. Strength makes patience easy, decline makes panic inevitable, so when Americans describe China as aggressive, it reveals insecurity, not reality. China doesn't need to be aggressive, the numbers are moving in its favor. Meanwhile, the US still behaves like an empire with 700 bases abroad, trying to hold on to a world that no longer exists.